Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where I get to talk with really smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help to connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects and referral partners. And I'm excited today. Got a great guest. His name is Louis Schiff. We recently connected. He is the chairman of Birthing of Giants, which is a highly regarded fellowship program held a couple times a year through MIT and Oxford University. They bring together thought leaders and engaged business owners, and they help them to create a really powerful, successful year ahead. He's also the author of a number of different books, including Business Brilliant, The Middle Class Millionaire, and The First Habit. And we're going to dive into his background, his history, and some of his thoughts on what's happening in the world. We're recording this in end of May of 2020, and we've got the whole coronavirus pandemic still unfolding, so that's still to be figured out. But first, before we get into that interview, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. And at our company, Rise 25, we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You're listening to this podcast, so I know you like podcasts, but if you've ever thought about doing a podcast, I say yes, you should do it. It's one of the best things I've ever done in my life over the last 10 years of doing it, and that's why I keep doing it, even though I have young kids, and they keep me plenty busy, because I get to talk to really smart people like you, Louis. And so if you want to learn more, you can go to rise25media.com or email support@rise25media. All right, Louis, so I'm excited to talk to you and dive a little bit into your background, but let's start here. An interesting thing about your background is as far back as 1994, now 26 years ago, you were involved in one of the early content-based websites. Really, ultimately, when you talk about content marketing, you were really in the early stages of content marketing with one of the web properties that was essentially a personal finance-based website providing information on a website in 1994, which was really early stages. I think I got my first email address in 1994. I can remember, I was in college at the time, and I can remember with my buddy Wes from across the hall and like doing dial-up and all. I'm dating myself, but I remember those early stages going on Yahoo, all that kind of stuff. What was that like in the early days working on a web property?
Well, you just mentioned Yahoo. I mean, talk about the monster of all monsters. Like Yahoo owned the world back then. And
sure did. Yeah.
You could get or AOL and Yahoo, they owned the universe. And so
yeah, the world was their oyster in 1994.
I know. And so whenever anyone says, no one will ever defeat Amazon or Facebook will be king forever, I say, just wait around. There's 4 seasons in a year.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was early. I don't think of it really in those terms. I do. It was absolutely in the time of dial-up. So I do remember that infamous sound that started every session, and the number of times things failed when you were uploading or downloading. And wow, I remember so many of the difficulties we went through. But yeah, we were figuring stuff out, and we were playing to a small audience. We were making mistakes in real time, and we learned tons.
Yeah. What were you doing? You were an executive.
I was the executive producer,
okay.
Which is a title we made up. I'm not sure what it meant then. I'm not sure what it means now. But Worth magazine was a personal finance magazine, kind of a high-end personal finance magazine. So that means how do you invest and how do you live well? And our website was trying to interpret a monthly magazine. This is where it gets interesting, but only again if you remember that era. Magazines have a particular purpose. They kind of review the last several months of whatever, and they try to put some perspective on it. So we were faced with a challenge that has happened only in an accelerated way, which is you take something monthly and turn it into something that's 24 hours a day. And that's only accelerated. So now, you've got constant content. This is the time of Corona. You mentioned that, print magazines, literally magazines that still print in paper, all of whom have companion websites now, just like I started Worth's companion website. It's questionable about whether print will come back at all because there's some economic realities that'll make it difficult. So to kind of close the circle, we started the website for a monthly print magazine. I fear 26 years later, it might be the end of print entirely now. Mm-hmm. Monthly print, the monthly magazine print category.
It's interesting because here we are in late May, and just now I'm starting to get some of these monthly magazines that were laid out probably in beginning of April, and now they're starting to address coronavirus or sheltering in place or, 2 months later. So you're right. They're on this really long cycle where they plan their content way in advance. And so for 2 months, it's just seemed like completely tone deaf. It's not their fault. It's just because they planned out the content way earlier.
The beast.
Right.
And I can tell you there's a great documentary of a product called Magic. It was made with Sony. It was like an early smartphone. And I remember going to a congressional testimony from the Small Business Administration and live blogging using my Motorola Envoy, which was the tool, using the Magic operating system. Live blogging at a Small Business Administration testimony in front of Congress on worth.com. And I swear that was the first of something. I don't know what that was the first of, but it was very tricky.
What did you feel like at that time? Imagine if you told someone in the room there that you were live blogging, they'd probably been like, what the heck is that?
Well, I certainly didn't call it blogging because that word didn't exist, but I think, and also now that little black box with a weird antenna sticking up would have probably gotten me kicked out of Congress so fast. Right. So we were making it up as we went along.
I mean, now people are tweeting in the back of those, hearing rooms.
Oh yeah, the revolution is, I don't want to say it's complete, but I mean, given what we started with in Worth.com in 1994 and what we are today is, it's complete. It's as I said, the print magazine, which is we were the offspring of print magazines. And now, of course, the biggest websites in the world have nothing to do with any traditional media title. Facebook has nothing to do with television or print or anything like that.
Tell us about another media property that you developed, Armchair Millionaire.
Right. So out of worthmagazine.com or worth.com, I ended up meeting some of the most amazing investors in the world. And it was very clear in private conversations that the way that, quote unquote, Wall Street invested and the way that they told their customers to invest were entirely different. And so I wrote a book about how the smart guys on Wall Street invest. I mean, to this day, Warren Buffett has very explicit instructions. When I am gone, follow the Armchair Millionaire method. I don't mean he calls it that. I just mean it's the methodology I laid out in this book. But before I wrote the book, I had a wonderful meeting with a very famous venture capital company called Kleiner Perkins behind Google and Apple and so many other great companies. And they connected me with iVillage, which was a nascent community. They connected me with Intuit, which was the maker of Quicken. And we all got together. We made something called armchairmillionaire.com, where I essentially used the techniques of the smartest investors in the world. This is also 25 years ago, when index fund investing was relatively new, a tiny piece of the market back then. And that's the basis for the investing method. Today, index fund investing is the monster. It's the biggest thing, index funds are the biggest things out there in terms of assets. So I was early then, but I started this property and I got the backing of Intuit, Kleiner, Perkins, and iVillage. And I launched a little website called Armchair Millionaire that I sold to iVillage, which subsequently got sold to NBC.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And so looking back on it now, what's that? What is content marketing like for you today to see some of the, all the proliferation of all the websites out there? If you were starting over and you were creating a content-based website today, what would you advise someone to do?
Well, I think the time has never been better in terms of the audience. Obviously, the audience is totally global. The ability to monetize your page views and everything else is instantaneous, whereas for us, it was much harder back then. The audience was small and the ability to monetize was very tricky. So the challenge, of course, is that as all these barriers have come down, it took months to get a credit card account back then, months, mm-hmm. and you had to know somebody. And now, I can have a credit card by the end of this podcast, a credit card account. So So the barriers have all come down. The ability to monetize has gone up. The global nature of the audience has gone up, but so has the amount of noise. And so this is really the trick of it all, is we've come to this time, and I understand it, where you have to have some unique connection with your audience, some authentic and unique connection with your audience in order to get their attention. And then they kind of vote with their ears and eyes. And obviously there's some giant podcasts out there, some giant content marketing businesses that do a really good job of it. So I don't think you need venture capital money to do this. I think you need to take a shot at it on your own and see if you can build an audience on your own. And the downside of all that is the idea of being a great idea, sitting around with people and saying, let's come up with a good idea, is not really the point. It's, can you find people who like your idea? That's really all that matters. And there was a time,
the Kevin Kelly 1,000 True Fans principle.
Yeah. I mean, even to this day, I'm from New York and I worked in magazines for years. And, there's a person called an editor, and this person is almost extinct at this point, but just take like the New York Times, front page. There's really smart people who say, these are the 6 stories we think belong on the front page today. They're not asking the audience, they're assessing it for themselves. And that's kind of a lost art. And now it's, if people don't click, if people don't listen, if people don't watch, it doesn't really, you don't have to have good ideas. You just have to get people to watch, click, and listen.
So what's the role today? If we have all these metrics to tell us what people want, what role does an editor play in saying that this is what I think people would like? Do we even need that role anymore?
Pretty little, pretty small. I mean, the Amazon revolution is that, it doesn't really matter what smart people think. Just throw a gazillion people at a web page and track what they do, and then do more of it. And so the role of a smart person, whether it's user interface people, whether it's editors, whether it's graphic designers, saying, I think this is the best way to do it, it's been lost. It's going to be lost. If you can throw enough people at it and you can do real-time split A/B testing of everything everywhere, then you don't really need editors anymore.
Right. I want to get to asking you about Birthing of Giants and what you're doing with that right now, especially in light of coronavirus. You've written a number of different books. One of them stands out to me because I love interviewing smart people, but The First Habit, what I learned while interviewing over 1,000 success stories. So what did you learn? I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, it's really, really tight and short and simple. It's that, and it's sort of what I call entrepreneurship today. And so take heed if that means anything to you. The idea is that the most successful, and by this I mean financially successful people I know, are people who have figured out what they're best at and built their business around it. That sounds very simple, but what I mean is, there are people who are really good at negotiating. So if you look at how they built their business, it's because they negotiated their way through to success. There's people who are really good at building teams of creative people or teams of engineers. I use Steve Jobs as an example. I mean, he was really good at understanding the needs of a creative class and explaining that to the engineer class. And that was what he was great at. And so, he built Apple out of that. So I think you have to figure out, and this is the beauty of our journey. The beauty of our journey is we figure out what we're good at by figuring out what we're not good at. I fail, I succeed. Okay, let me focus on that success. Then what's the business you build around it? And that business could be a business that makes $1 million. And maybe you have to break it down to its parts and rebuild it. Now it makes $10 million. Then you have to break it down and rebuild it, and maybe it's worth $100 million. But you're still building on that thing that you're best at. To use Apple as an example, I thought the most perfect era of Apple is that they had 30 products and they did $30 billion in revenue. So that means, if you do the math, it's not quite this way, but each product did $1 billion. And the point is, each product really was really important. Each one added up to the whole. And that was because Steve Jobs sat in the middle there. He didn't talk to Wall Street analysts. He didn't care about that stuff. He didn't motivate his team. He wasn't a leader in that sense. He just sat there all the time and said, what's the best way to solve this problem? How can I get my engineers to do what my artists, my creative class customers want? That's all he ever thought about. And he did it well.
I'm assuming that must have been sometime after he came back, because wasn't he famous for when he came back to Apple in '97, he immediately said, we're doing too many things, and he eliminated a lot of different products.
It was his second run.
Right.
But so The First Habit, the book is really, and I have a million stories of it. It's when people figure out what they're best at and they build a business around it. That's the opportunity of entrepreneurship, figure out what you're best at. And that's hard. Figure out what you're best at and then figure out how to monetize it.
Yeah. And what about that piece for how to figure out what you're best at?
Well, I have a little trick in the book that I swear, even as recently as a month ago, I spoke to a guy who has what I now call the most perfect business model ever. And he said, I figured out how to do it by doing your little trick. And his little trick was, my little trick is send an email to 10 people you've worked with, all sorts of people who you worked for, people who worked for you, customers, acquaintances, peers, and ask them what they think you're good at and let them tell you, because you'd be surprised what people will tell you and that you don't see about yourself. So there are a lot of stories of people who have used that trick who said to me, I never knew I was really good at this. I always thought I was good at sales, but it turns out I was good at, building creative teams. They just didn't understand what they were good at. So when I run the Birthing of Giants Fellowship program, I know we'll talk about this, minute one of day one, they all send those 10 emails out. They haven't even introduced themselves to each other yet. I haven't even introduced myself to them yet. And the reason I make it the very first thing we do on minute one of day one is because everyone hates doing it. They think that no one's going to answer, or they don't know what they're going to hear back. So suck it up, write 10 emails. I have the text in there, but it basically says, I'm curious about what you think I'm good at that has to do with how I make money or how my business makes money.
And this guy, Lewis here, is forcing me to send this email.
Yeah, right, exactly. He has a gun to my head. And so, then we check back in it on Wednesday. So we do that on Monday, then it happens on Wednesday. And by Thursday and Friday, you've got people, I'm not kidding, in tears, seasoned business owners,
wow,
who've been around the block, who say, I never thought about that about me.
I want to emphasize one thing. You've got business owners, CEOs, founders, grizzled entrepreneurs who are in the room with you, $200 million businesses. And you're standing up there saying, you have to send these emails, and they're doing it.
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize that point, because I know that there are others who will listen to this and they'll say, I'm not going to do that. But
they have to do it. They have to do it.
Yeah.
And as I said, I haven't even introduced myself yet to them when this happens.
I love
the very
that.
first thing we do.
I love that. You just blaze into the room. They're like, who is this guy? And you send this email to your 10.
Well, it's classic sales. Your credibility is highest after you've closed the deal, but before you've delivered the product. So,
there you go.
They've already paid for it, so they might as well do what I tell them to do.
Right. All right. So Birthing of Giants. Now, it has an interesting, varied background. So Inc. magazine was involved in founding it. EO also had a role in founding it. That's how I first heard about it, because I've been involved in EO. And I heard about it a bunch of different times. But now its own separate independent fellowship program. So explain to us what Birthing of Giants is now in 2020.
Right. So Birthing of Giants, first of all, is part of the larger category of, what I call CEO development. I mean, every CEO, whether you're starting out or you have a monster company, has to keep getting better and better and better. And we serve a very specific niche. It's for owners of companies. They have to own at least 10% of the business. Owners of companies that have revenues between $5 million and $250 million. So somebody with a company with less than 5 million might hear that and say, oh, that's not fair. I wish I knew what those guys knew. But we don't let people in below 5 million, and we don't let people in above 250 million. I mean, we've had companies of multi-billion dollars try to get in, and the answer is no. And the reason is companies between 5 million and 250 million are very particular. They are companies that almost always have a strong leadership, but sort of a middling management team and middling access to capital. And their grasp on their marketplace is also middling. And so the only way they go from where they are to 10 times bigger is by solving a few of those problems. So Birthing of Giants Fellowship takes between 20 and 30 business owners twice a year for a 1-week program. And we hunker down and we go through, the sales aspect of their business, the financial model of their business, the capital market aspect of their business, the management team aspect of their business. And for 5 days, we basically make them work towards something called 1 year from today, a 12-month strategic plan. And on day 5, they present their 1 year from today plan to an incredible array of experts in entrepreneurship, incredibly accomplished people. And then we have this kind of scrappy, fight about, what you're thinking right and what you're thinking wrong about your business. And at the end of the week, we pour them into a taxi and they go back home and they implement, and we follow up with them. But Birthing of Giants is a 1-week boot camp for CEOs, but again, for $5 million to $250 million businesses. And the seeds of success are, there. I mean, we've had $250 million exits in the past year from some of our folks. We've had every spectacular outcome. People came in with $5 million businesses that are doing $50 million 3 years later. We've had people who have, gone from 200 million to 400 million in sales. Because the secrets to doing this are not secrets. They're in the data. And so the whole curriculum is data driven.
And how has the transition been going for you, switching it over and having to do these things more virtually?
Well, entrepreneurs do not love virtual education. Everyone said, pivot to virtual. This is the moment. They don't like it because every really good entrepreneur knows that if you have 20 other entrepreneurs in the room, there is gold in them in our hills. You have to buttonhole all 19 of the other folks, and you have to ask them what they know that you don't know. So we have done, 20 webinars in the past couple of months, and we've done a lot of great private sessions, really good content. But entrepreneurs need to be around each other. So, we are one of those businesses that looks at everything happening now and says, we need for things to get back to normal. I say that with humility because a lot of businesses are learning how to do things in a new way right now, and they'll never go back to doing them the old way, and that's right. But this thing called CEO development has a lot to do with people being in a room with each other and building personal networks, and we can't do that right now. So we're just educating for free all of our, students and graduates, and just keeping the lights going.
Yeah. I want to ask you, in light of what you said about the number one insight that you got from your book, The First Habit, that you should find the thing that you're the best in the world at. It sounds like Birthing of Giants is a lot of different things. It's networking, it's content, it's bringing people together. Which element of all of those do you feel like you're the best in the world at? Or is it all of them? Or is there one in particular?
Well, no. So the thing I'm best in the world at is asking questions. And even though the roles are reversed, I'm being asked questions right now by you, John. But my thing that I'm really good at is asking questions. And so the curriculum for Birthing of Giants is based on me and some others having asked thousands of questions up to thousands of entrepreneurs over the years. The thing that everybody should know is that Birthing of Giants, everybody in that room already knows a lot about what they're good at. I mean, we refine it and we refine it. So when they come in the room, they know what they're good at that allows them to build a $10 million business. I need to help them figure out, if we know what they're good at, let's figure out how to turn that into a $100 million business. And so that's the exercise. So these folks are well on their journey. Their skins are thick. They can take anything. If you gave an entrepreneur at the beginning of his journey or her journey, you find out that they're much less open to criticism than these guys are. They're much less aware of where their strengths lie and their weaknesses are. Not only in The First Habit did I learn that you have to know what you're good at, you also have to be intimate with what you're bad at so that you avoid it like the plague. So you always hire other people to do those things. A lot of people starting out wear many hats and they try to do all these things and they don't really know what they're good at. And that's normal for an entrepreneur. But over the years, the folks in my program, men and women in my program, Birthing of Giants, they know a lot about themselves. We just need to amp it all up. And what happens is we need to tie what they're good at with a better business model. That's really what it comes down to. So it gets very in the weeds of business models, economic models, capital sources, tied to what you're good at.
Is it hard to sell CEOs of a $10 or $100 million business? Is it hard to sell them on coming to an event based on the promise of, we're going to ask you good questions? Is that hard to sell? You're thinking like, I'm going to get content, I'm going to get training, you're going to give me mentorship, that kind of thing. No. You guys are going to come and we're going to ask you a good question.
Right. It's funny. Sometimes our enrollment team says, we spoke to this person who was nominated to be in the program, but they actually think they should be a teacher in the program, which I always jokingly say, I bet their business is like 5 million or less. And it's always true. So it seems like people who have smaller businesses think they should all be teachers, and people who have bigger businesses think they should be students.
Yeah,
which
that's
tells you
totally
everything.
true. That's totally true. My business for a while, we used to do a lot of events, similar but different types of events. We would bring together a group, and the ones with the much larger businesses were always the ones that were the best students, that were learning the most humble in terms of their education, all that kind of stuff. That's great. And you also have something really interesting you're working on now. You look like you were going to add something right there before I get to Moonshot and Moneymakers.
Well, I was just going to say that, that really birthing of giants for me, because I've built 2 businesses. I've sold those businesses to publicly traded companies. I could keep doing that. I'm not the richest guy in the world, but I'm not quite that money hungry. What I wanted to do is spend all my time with people I like. And so that person who's that lifelong learner and that, sort of curious soul is who I want to spend time with. And so really birthing of giants is kind of a fancy way of me saying, come hang out with me and pay me to hang out with you.
Yeah. When we did these events, I used to joke sometimes with my business partner, Jeremy. He would come up to me and be like, this is so cool. This is so much fun. Aren't you having a lot of fun? I was like, I'm going to start charging you to come to this thing. You're enjoying it too much. I think you're probably kind of the same thing. Now, you said the current incarnation of Birthing Giants had an interesting incubation. So I think you said you approached Inc. Magazine. How did that come about? It seemed like you kind of like put the deal together.
Well, there are a few things that made Birthing of Giants. So one thing is the faculty. Okay, there were these incredible entrepreneurs who were at the beginning of Birthing of Giants. A lot of them came from Inc. Magazine. So I'm talking about guys like Norm Brodsky, who is sort of the best known Inc. 5000 entrepreneur out there. Bo Burlingham, who was the founding editor, or the creator of the Small Giants program at Inc. Magazine. George Genrin, who created the Inc. 5000 list. I mean, these were the original teachers. And they went to teach at this thing called Birthing of Giants because Inc. told them to. They said, go help these people out. And Inc. and EO were working together to create this program. So EO contributed some teachers, Inc. contributed some teachers. What happened over time, it's not that interesting to anybody really, is that Inc. and EO went their separate ways. The original faculty of Birthing of Giants that include people like Norm Brodsky, George Genrin, Bo Burlingham, went on to do other things. And then when I had a chance to acquire the Birthing of Giants trademark and apply it to the curriculum I had been building through the research I had done over the years, I had done a lot of projects with Inc. Magazine and stuff. I asked that original faculty to come back. So, it's sort of like, when is a horse a horse? I would say, if you've got the original faculty, and I guess if you have the original trademark, then that's Birthing of Giants.
Yeah.
But there is another really great program, wonderful program that EO has that kind of came out of all that lives to this day and does great work. And I think, entrepreneurs are all the better for having all these choices.
Yeah. Moonshots and Moneymakers is a newer program you've created, which has an interesting focus. So tell us about that one.
So, one of the great things about spending a lot of time with one small group of people, these business owners, is you start to see the patterns. And the patterns became clear that the whole world was saying, add tech to your business. I mean, 10 years ago, it was, put your business in the cloud and get a CRM system and all this kind of stuff. But over the years, it's been, techify your business one way or another. And of course, there's a whole Silicon Valley world dedicated to that very thing. What I saw were that a lot of smaller businesses, I'll call them, $25 million businesses that were really doing well, that had a niche, they were doing their thing, usually a B2B business, were figuring out how to bring tech into their business. And all of a sudden, those $25 million businesses were doing a lot more revenue, and they were also worth a lot more money to a buyer because they had sort of unlimited potential at that point. And it occurred to me that there's a whole very well-developed world, we'll call it Silicon Valley for lack of a better way of describing it, that takes really smart money, combines it with really smart people, and lets them start something from scratch. We've got minimally viable products, we've got alphas and betas. But a moneymaker is a company that's been around for a long time and figured out its market, but it hasn't really injected tech into its business yet. And the real reason to inject tech is not tech for tech's sake. It's that almost every techification of a business yields a higher gross margin in that business, which is like the lifeblood of every business is high gross margins. and increases the size of the audience. And so really what every business owner has to do, $10 million, $25 million business, is figure out how to transition their product or service so that they have higher gross margins and a bigger audience, period. But you're going to find that it's almost always tech that helps you do that. So we created this conference called Moonshots and Moneymakers with the Oxford arm of the innovation group at Oxford to basically start helping these 10, 25, $50 million businesses see how they can go from being a moneymaker, a solid business with a great reputation and profit, and they could transform their businesses into moonshots, businesses that would be valued at many, many multiples of its current valuation because they had figured out how to either increase their gross margins or increase the size of their audience or both. So if you put these two things together, John, first habit is figure out what you're good at and build a business around it. The second is figure out how technology can help you increase the gross margins and the size of the audience. And if I were to look at the biggest and baddest entrepreneur success stories out there, and with you, and we took it apart, I would show you how they always figured out what they were good at, they built a business around it, and then they figured out how to use tech to increase gross margins and expand the audience. It's the exact same pattern every time. It's just not talked about like that. So Moonshots and Moneymakers is inviting the business owners of the world to figure out how to take that deconstructed roadmap and apply it to their business.
And how is, if at all, how is the pandemic affecting this program, and how is it affecting the companies that are part of it?
So our August 2020 launch of Moonshots and Moneymakers, actually, it's really the second year we did it, but we didn't call it Moonshots and Moneymakers the first time. The August 2020 has been postponed to August 2021. Okay. We are only accepting 25 business owners to attend. And really what's going to happen there is they're going to learn how to turn. So imagine you've got a $10 million business that has a $1 million profit every year. Pretty simple, right? A 10% EBITDA. And someone comes along and says, oh, this business is probably worth 7 times EBITDA. So I'll pay you $7 million for your $10 million business. That's a pretty normal thing I just said, if somebody would really buy it. What we're going to do in Moonshots and Moneymakers is show them how that business that's really valued at $7 million can be valued at $100 million if they just use this deconstructed roadmap. And so for 1 week, we're going to introduce them to the innovators that are going to help them do it.
Interesting. And so I did want to ask you before we wrap things up, since your superpower is being able to ask good questions, I'll turn the tables on me. What one question did I not ask you that I should have asked you that would have elicited a better or an uncaptured response from you?
Well, this is inside. You shouldn't have thought of this question maybe, but I guess you could say, where did all this come from? I had this. Where did this Moonshots and Moneymakers thing come from? Where did this combination of entrepreneurial strengths plus business model realities come from? And this is a weird story, but we lost a really great thinker in January of this year, Clayton Christensen, who was sometimes called the father of Silicon Valley in a way, not so much that he lived there, but that his ideas led to it. He was a Harvard Business School professor. He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. And I feel like, I swear to God, when he died, sadly, in January, he had a very difficult life with his health. I feel like his soul left him and some of his soul's best ideas came into me. And so that sounds weird.
Did you know him?
I did not know him. I just felt like I had read so much of his stuff and watched him on YouTube a lot. And I realized that the thing that was incredible about his work, which led to the concept that small companies would disrupt large companies, was missing some pieces that allowed it to be predictive. By that I mean, for all of his incredible work, he could only tell you when a company was successfully disrupted after it happened. And I think what happened in that weird moment, I remember reading about his loss and thinking about him. And I said, wait a second, there's a way to do this where you can figure out which companies are going to innovate and disrupt before it happens. And that's what Moonshots and Moneymakers has become, this roadmap for how you do that. And I think that's just the one thing that's my genuinely original thought is, now I can tell you which companies will and which companies won't be able to thrive transitioning from a really good, profitable company to a total moonshot. And that moment was a really weird moment. I just reading about him, I swear, I just felt like my soul was just like, invaded by these ideas from his.
That
And I'm
was
not a
great-
particularly spiritual person.
That was a great question. So I wish I'd asked it, but I'm glad you asked it. So I think I'm going to have to ask that question every time I have a guest. Like, what question should I have asked you that I should?
That's a great
not?
question.
It is. I do want to ask, so, you've written books, you've had web-based properties. Kind of the theme of a lot of these are bigger impact, but this program is small. You only are aiming to have 25 people and not until a year and a half from now. Why so small? Or are there plans to then make it larger after the fact?
Well, basically, a business owner who's got 100 employees, and maybe 1,000
by the way,
customers.
I shouldn't minimize how challenging it is to get a group of 25 qualified business owners in the room in Oxford, England for a week. Not easy to do. Right. But yeah, I just meant the number, 25 people.
Yeah, and so we think of scale as, you just heard me say it. The number of employees they have, those employees have families, they've got customers, they've got vendors and supply chains. So what we've always thought is the best way to have an impact on that entire ecosystem that, let's say, one company represents is to work with the birthing of giants, to work with the giant that runs that company. Mm-hmm. And then if we can get that giant to go from a moneymaker, a really incredible accomplishment to build any kind of a moneymaker, just a huge accomplishment, and to have them turn it into the Moonshot, that company that becomes worth 100 times more, we know that they can't do it alone. They can't. So we know we're impacting all the employees, all the vendors, and all the supply chains, all the capital partners around them by working with that one person. So in efficiency's sake, 25 people is the biggest way to affect 50,000 people.
Yeah, I see it. That's great. Well, I want to wrap things up. The last question I always ask is, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars and the Emmys, and you, Lewis, are receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And what we want to know is, in addition to family and friends, who else do you acknowledge in your remarks?
So that's a great question. And I will say that the faculty that joins me at Birthing of Giants I can't believe they said yes to do this for us and for me. It's guys like Norm Brodsky, who have built multiple businesses, all of them moneymakers, all of them, humanistic in their approach to how they treated people. Guys like Bo Burlingham, who can look at an entrepreneur and say, here's what's really remarkable about you. He just has this ability to see the best, most amazing stories in entrepreneurs. Guys like George Genrin, who, basically created Inc. magazine, who's the founding editor of Inc. magazine. Doug Tatum is an amazing guy who, if you tell him your business, he'll tell you statistics and perspective and aspects of your business that even you thought, this guy must work in my sector. There's no way he can know this much about my business. But he can do that for anybody's business because he had 1,100 CFOs reporting to him for over a decade.
Wow.
Jim McCann from 1-800-Flowers, who's really the smartest commerce person. He's an e-commerce guy, but he's really, he's a merchant in his bones. He's a merchant, and merchants really do matter. And so the board of experts that have joined me for the ride for Birthing Giants are like my favorite incredible entrepreneurs I've ever had a chance to hang out with.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks so much for that. So Birthing of Giants is the name of the company. Moonshots and Moneymakers. Sorry, it's a mouthful. Moonshots and Moneymakers. Where can people go to learn more about you, Lewis?
Birthingofgiants.com. That's it.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.